Hello and welcome to the Run Testers. My name's Nick, and in this video we're going to be comparing the new Saucony Endorphin Elite to the Nike Vaporfly 2. So the Vaporfly is probably still the kingpin of the carbon shoe market, but the Endorphin Elite is a very exciting new addition to that market and a big competitor to what has been the most popular option for most runners over the last few years. On price, the Elite comes in a lot more expensive. It's 280 quid in the UK or $275 in the US, whereas the Vaporfly is £225 in the UK, $250 in the US, although it is often in sales these days. The Vaporfly is the lighter shoe. It's 206 grams or 7.3 ounces in my UK 9, whereas the Endorphin Elite is 219 grams or 7.7 ounces in a UK 9. They both have an 8mm drop. The stack of the Elite is 39.5mm at the heel. The Vaporfly stack isn't officially listed by Nike, but it's probably slightly less than that, but it's not far off 40mm. The Vaporfly has a breathable engineered mesh upper with this strip of padding around the back to create a little bit of extra comfort. It's got a full ZoomX midsole, Nike's PEBA-based foam, with a full-length carbon plate running through the middle of it, and then the outsole has decent rubber coverage at the forefoot there, and then two strips at the back with a fair amount of exposed foam. The Endorphin Elite has a knit mesh upper with lots of cutouts on it, little gaps that you can see your foot through to try and shave a little bit of weight. It's got one small patch of padding just on the Achilles there. Then the midsole is Saucony's new Power Run HG foam, which is designed to be a bit firmer and bouncier, more responsive than the Power Run PB foam we've seen on shoes like the Endorphin Pro 3. You've got a carbon plate running the full length of the shoe with a slotted design under the forefoot to create a little bit more flexibility there, and a more aggressive speed roll rocker than we've seen on past shoes in the Endorphin range like the Speed and Pro. You've got a rubber outsole just on the forefoot on one side of the back there with a big midsole cutout there to try and again save weight, and then a fair bit of exposed foam, but this firmer Power Run HG stuff doesn't seem to have shown any signs of wear for me yet.
So in terms of fit, it's nice and simple for me on both of these. The Saucony Endorphin Elite and the Nike Vaporfly NEXT 2 ran in a UK 8.5, which is my size, and I would recommend going true to size in both of these. Plenty room enough, good lockdown fit on both, and good heel hold. So yeah, for me, go true to size.
Fit for me in these two shoes, I would say true to size in both of them. I have no issues with either of them. Both of them are actually similar in terms of the way that they fit the foot. Both are quite serious race shoes, and they're probably a little bit lean, a little bit tighter on the midfoot section for me, but no issues at all, and true to size in both.
So on the fit of the two shoes, the Saucony Endorphin Elite fits me very well, true to size. I've had no concerns with the upper or the amount of room in the toe box. Vaporfly does fit me well, true to size, but I do have to heel lock the newer Vaporfly, the Vaporfly 2, in order to avoid getting any heel rub, which I did get on my first couple of runs in the shoe. But when I do heel lock it, I have no concerns. So yeah, true to size in both shoes. So the Vaporfly is the Vaporfly. Everyone knows how great this shoe is. I'm a huge fan of it. It's still the quintessential carbon shoe really for any distance, even if it now seems to steer more towards short distances with softer, more cushy shoes coming in for the marathon. That said, I ran my marathon PB in this shoe last year, ran 2:28 at Berlin, and I also ran my 5K PB in the shoe. It's just a fantastic carbon racing shoe. It's very hard to overstate how good it is. It's got a very snappy, aggressive ride, pushes you onto your toes and bounces you on your way, but at the same time, there's enough ZoomX foam there to be comfortable enough for those longer events. I will say personally, it's not my favourite marathon shoe. I used it for Berlin because I needed something a bit firmer at the time because I wasn't getting on with some softer shoes, but since then I've gone back to the softer shoes and enjoyed them a bit more. Like at the end in Berlin, the last 5-6k, I just felt a bit more beat up in the Vaporfly than I have done in marathons in things like the Alphafly. For example, at the Valencia Marathon in December, ran that in the Alphafly 2 and just felt that bit more protected deep into the race and had a bit more to give in the final few K as a result. But it still can't really fault the Vaporfly. It's lightning quick, works very well for so many runners, and just does everything you need it to do as a racing shoe. A lot of that seems to be true of the Elite. It's very aggressive, really rocks you forward quickly, tips you onto your toes and bounces you on your way. And I really enjoyed running fast in the shoe. Like I've done a 10k race in it, and a all-out park run, and a hard long session down the track that ended up around half marathon in distance. And whenever I'm running quick, I really like it. I don't think it's one of those carbon shoes that's a bit more versatile that you want to use for lots of training as well. The Vaporfly is a bit similar to this. Like you can use these for speed sessions and they're good, but they leave you a little bit more beaten up, I think, than other carbon shoes. And I found that especially the case with the Elite. Even after 10k, I was getting a bit of foot fatigue, and the next day I felt a bit like I'd taken a bit of a pasting, which you don't really expect these days from carbon shoes. But when you are actually running fast, it does a tremendous job. It feels really efficient, really supports that motion. The foam is a bit firmer, I think, than the Power Run PB foam used in the Endorphin Pro 3, and that means you just get rocked forward a bit faster and get a more aggressive feel that just feels really fantastic and fast. Performance, these are both excellent shoes, and it's quite hard to call which one I think is actually better on performance, but the Vaporfly is obviously a bit more tried and tested because we've had it for so long and so many have enjoyed using it for so long, but I still have slight doubts about both of them going up to the marathon. So even though I've got my PB in the Vaporfly in the marathon, I think it does lack a little bit of protection for those long events compared to what you can now use in terms of carbon shoes. And I think that's probably how I feel about the Elite as well. Like, it has left me feeling quite beaten up after hard long runs in it, or even a 10k race. So I still have some doubts about whether I'd want to use it for the marathon myself, but if you do crave that very direct, aggressive feel, then the Endorphin Elite provides it.
So you can't really do a versus with a new shoe if you don't take into account the Vaporfly or the Vaporfly 2. Now, the Vaporfly is the first super shoe I ever tried, and it still holds a very important place in my heart. So I still put it up there with maybe my top 2 or 3 carbon plate shoes out at the moment. It's still a fantastic shoe. Very, very good at running fast over pretty much every distance for me. It's just got a lovely combination of the carbon plate, which sort of springs you forward, with that ZoomX foam, which gives you this fantastic level of bounce, whilst being incredibly light as well. It's definitely one of the fastest shoes out at the moment, still one of the fastest shoes, and it just delivers the goods every time you need it. It's a fantastic option for running fast at all different distances. Now, the Saucony Endorphin Elite is an interesting one because the Pro 3, when we first heard about the Elite, I sort of expected it to be a progression of the Pro 3, and the Pro 3 is not very similar to the Vaporfly. The Pro 3 is like a comfortable, accessible, softer race shoe that doesn't really do the same things that the Vaporfly does. Vaporfly pushes your foot into a position and really propels you forward. It pushes you forward. It's almost impossible to run slowly in the Vaporfly because it makes you run faster and efficiently as well. Whereas the Elite, when it came out, it wasn't like the Pro 3. It was more like it's a shoe more like the Vaporfly. It does a similar thing to the Vaporfly in that it pushes your foot into a certain way. It propels you forward in a way that you can't really go slow in this shoe. And I've tried a few slower runs in this shoe, including a 16 miler which I did in this, and that was slower than my marathon pace, so like 45-minute kilometers, and it just couldn't do it. It just didn't feel great. It didn't want to do it. It was sort of wanted me to go faster. It wanted me to propel me forward. So I was holding it back, and I could feel I was doing that. It would be the same in the Vaporfly, but I think the difference between these shoes is that the Vaporfly ZoomX foam is very soft, and it's very comfortable as well in a way. It does sort of move your feet into a position, but that ZoomX is fantastic foam, and it really does work well with the carbon plate to just bounce you along. I don't feel that the Elite is bouncing you. I feel it's propelling you forward a bit, rolling you forward, but it's firmer than the Vaporfly, and possibly not as enjoyable for me as the Vaporfly. The Vaporfly is a very efficient shoe, and really you just feel like you're just leaping forward of each one. I don't feel that with this shoe, because it's a bit firmer than the Vaporfly, but equally they're both probably on a par when it comes to speed. I feel very fast in the Elite. I just don't find it to be a particularly natural shoe. It feels almost like everything you do in the shoe is being dictated by the shoe, which is the same as the Vaporfly, but I think the Vaporfly is a little bit more subtle than that, and a little bit more enjoyable. But both of them, I think, are great options if you're looking for a fast race shoe, and both of them are quite similar in the way that they work as well. They're not subtle, comfortable, soft carbon plate shoes. They're very much aggressive, all-out speed, making you go faster even if you don't want to shoes.
So for the run test then, I've put these through similar tests, although I've done many, many more miles in the Vaporfly NEXT 2. So I've run a solo marathon test in the Endorphin Elite. I haven't run it in race conditions, but I have done it at marathon paces. I've run my PB over the marathon in the Vaporfly NEXT 2. I've done halves, I've done all out 5 and 10Ks in both of these shoes, as well as interval sessions and slower runs. So I've tested them pretty much over the same kind of tests, if not as many miles, in the Saucony Endorphin Elite. I've also done a side-by-side test running a mile with one of each of these shoes on each of my feet. Here's what I found. Oh, and apologies for the sniffing, but I'd literally just done that mile and it was cold. So I've just done a mile with the Vaporfly NEXT 2 on one foot, and I've got the Saucony Endorphin Elite on the other foot. Now, when it comes to some of these shoe comparisons we've done, there's not massive margins between the two shoes, but these two shoes are chalk and cheese. And it just seems so random to me that when you look back at the Vaporfly being one of the first super shoes, how we all thought it was sort of huge and enormous stack and big cushion and all this spring and this crazy new thing. And when you're running with it now compared to the Elite, it feels like a minimalist shoe. It feels lighter. It feels kind of much more kind of minimal on the foot. There's so much less shoe, there's less cushion, it's more direct, there's more ground coming up through the midsole. It's just not as sort of kind of big cushion, bouncy, propulsive. But one thing I will say, there's a difference in the way that these two shoes ride. I think you have to, with Vaporfly NEXT 2, it encourages you to get more up on your kind of mid to forefoot on your toes to get the best out of it. I think you've got to run with a higher cadence because there's less protection there. The Elite, because you've got quite a big stack of cushion all the way along the back, there's arguably kind of more protection there if you're landing a little bit more heel. There's an argument to say that it encourages you a little bit more to land on your heel because of that. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but depends how you run. For me, I kind of prefer to run mid to forefoot with high cadence. That said, that's good form. When I get ragged, it's nice to have that extra protection if it goes wrong later in a marathon. And I think the Elite have got that in spades. I think the Elite have this kind of big, wide, sort of stable platform. I think the Vaporfly NEXT 2 are also a stable shoe by comparison to some of the other super shoes. And in that sense, these two, I think, have both got stability, but there's a bit more back in the heel for protection, I think, if you get a little bit ragged in the Elite. Now, which one's giving you more propulsion? I'd say definitely the Elite. Which one's got more spring? Definitely the Elite. Which one have you got that kind of big bed of cushioning? Definitely the Elite. I think overall kind of the foothold and the uppers marginally, I think in terms of the heel hold, I'd give it to the Elite. I think that's got a bit more kind of Loctite fit than the Vaporfly, and I think that's just because the Vaporfly is very, very minimal. You haven't got much cushioning, much padding in there. I think that big lump of padding that's on the back of the Elite actually really does sort of help to keep that heel sort of firmly in place. But yeah, really different chalk and cheese here. I think you've got a more kind of, almost more like a flat ride as well, a bit lower in the Vaporfly NEXT 2. Very different shoes now. I think one thing I start to think of is you start to sort of think about the Vaporfly NEXT 2 maybe as a shorter distance, sort of faster shoe. I mean, I still think it's a great shoe for marathon running as well, but compared to the Elite, which might be something you would lace up to go longer in, that's maybe one way of calling it. But very, very different shoes now, I think.
The Nike Vaporfly 2 is undoubtedly the kind of most universally adopted of the carbon plate shoes still. But the Endorphin Elite makes it feel unresponsive because of the crazy bounciness of it. The Vaporfly is a bit lighter, 186 grams versus 193 for my women's size 7s. It feels like the Endorphin Elite kind of removes the heel stripe because so much goes on with the toe off from a kind of bounce point of view, but you're not actively using your toes. The Vaporfly is quite kind of slappy in comparison to the kind of noise that you get on the Endorphin Elite. But on the strides, it just felt like my toes were kind of along for the ride in the Elite. I think up to a half marathon, I would be really tempted to try the Endorphin Elite. But I think over anything more than that, definitely the Vaporfly 2 wins hands down. It's much more comfortable. You let your feet feel much less beat up afterwards. It's got that kind of slight squish to it. They're not super squishy, are they? But and also at the moment, much better value for money because you can pick up Vaporfly 2s for what now seems like a reasonable amount.
So my verdict then on the Saucony Endorphin Elite versus the Vaporfly NEXT 2. I mean, these now are very, very different shoes. Although you put them both in the super shoe, carbon shoe bracket, I think there's a reason that the Vaporfly NEXT 2, you still see it on many, many feet when you go to a marathon race start. I think partly that is if people who like a shoe that is a little bit more direct. It sounds crazy to say it, but that's the case with the Vaporfly NEXT 2. It's lighter. I think it feels a little bit more racy overall. It's stripped back. It now feels a bit more kind of minimal compared to the likes of the Saucony Endorphin Elite. So if you want something like that, lighter area, more minimal on the foot, a bit more direct, something that's going to encourage you to get up onto your kind of forefoot and strike a bit with high cadence, then I do think that the Vaporfly NEXT is that shoe. I think the Vaporfly NEXT arguably could be a good shoe to use over shorter distances as well. If you want something that's a bit more cushioned, a bit more kind of spring and responsive, a bit more punchy, then I think that you're going to get more out of the midsole foam on the Saucony Endorphin Elite. I also think if you want a little bit more protection later into a race, you're going to get a lot more from the Saucony Endorphin Elite. So if you're looking for a shoe that might be able to handle when things go a little bit more ragged later on in a marathon or a half, then I think the Endorphin Elite is probably a better shoe. Now there's the one big kind of difference here is price. The Saucony Endorphin Elite is so much more expensive than the Nike Vaporfly NEXT 2, and I think personally that price tag makes it very, very hard to recommend overall. Performance-wise, and I think overall kind of versatility and race-wise, I actually think maybe that the Saucony Endorphin Elite is a better shoe, and I would choose that first now, particularly over the kind of longer distances. But when it comes down to looking at those price tags, I just find it very, very hard to recommend the Saucony Endorphin Elite. And I think in terms of value for money, and I think still for all-out racing, I think I'm still picking the Nike Vaporfly NEXT 2.
Okay, my verdict on these two shoes is quite a tricky one. I definitely go for the Vaporfly, not only because it's cheaper at the moment. You can get the Vaporfly 2 like near to £100 now, which is no-brainer really. This is a significantly more expensive shoe, and at the price this comes out at, I would go for the Vaporfly easily. There's no discussion for me about that. I think if this came down in price, maybe to something like £160, £180, I think that would be a good price for this shoe when compared with the other carbon plate shoes out at the moment. But for the price, definitely going to go to the Vaporfly. I think the Vaporfly is superior in the way that ZoomX foam works and the carbon plate, and it just feels like a faster, bouncier shoe, and it's a more enjoyable shoe to run in. The Endorphin Elite, I think, is a great shoe. I think it's a fast shoe. I think it's I could probably run comparable paces in these shoes, but I would just enjoy the Vaporfly more, whereas the Elite just feels a little bit too firm for me, and a little bit like it's pushing me out of my normal natural running style to do what this shoe wants me to do.
Pure performance is a really tricky call for me. I really do like the Elite, but I'm not sure it adds that much more protection than the Vaporfly, despite the fact it looks like a cushier, softer shoe. I think it still has that similar aggressive, firm feeling that means you're not getting a little bit of the extra cushion and protection you get from stuff like the Alphafly, the Adios Pro 3 when you're looking at the longer events. When it comes to the short stuff, it's hard to believe that any shoe really is better than the Vaporfly, just because we've had it for so long and it's worked so well all the time. So I think it's comparable. I think it's an excellent shoe for short races, and it'll be a great shoe for long races as well. Both of these shoes are, but whether I really think it's got the edge on the Vaporfly, I couldn't say that. The Vaporfly's just too good to just come in and make a statement about a new shoe and say it's better than it, and that's where the price comes into play, obviously, because the Vaporfly's a slightly older shoe. It's often in sales now for well under its RRP, down towards like £130, even less sometimes. And with the Vaporfly 3 coming, those sales are going to continue, and that's much, much cheaper than the Saucony Endorphin Elite, which I do think is a fantastic racing shoe. Would recommend it for people who want that aggressive feel, that firmer feel than you get with some of the carbon shoes these days, like the Endorphin Pro 3. But at the same time, if you're looking at buying it and you can find the Vaporfly for 150 quid less, I would buy the Vaporfly. So it's a tricky one to judge. Pure performance, there's not a lot in it for me, but the Vaporfly's got that pedigree. It works for lots of people, and it's a lot cheaper, so it's a pretty simple call in terms of what the smart thing to do is. But if you want to go out and try the latest shoe, I think you're going to get a very high level of performance here. So guys, that's our comparison of the Saucony Endorphin Elite and the Nike Vaporfly 2. Thanks very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.